Alright, so I just got my small bore tenor trombone back from the repair shop. So I now have three functional tenor trombones. I have small bore, medium bore, and large bore. So I figured since I had all three sizes, I would make a video talking about the differences. And you might be wondering, why do you have three trombones? I do actually use them all, at least sometimes, and they're good for different things. So I have three horns. So small bore, that's generally like if it's like in between like um, alto trombone size, like that size up to like 0.510 is like small bore, and then medium bore is like you know point 0.5. I think they're like 0.515, so it might be like medium bore. It's usually like 0.522, 0.525. And then large bores are like in the like, 0.545, 546, 547. So I have my small bore, which I just got back from the shop. I might make another video about that. It's Reynolds 28, and it's 0.500 bore. And then my medium bore, which mine is a 0.522, is a Conn 50H. And then my large tenor is a King 4B. And I think modern King 4Bs are all 0.547. Some of the older ones are 0.546, and mine's older, so I don't know if mine is 546 or 547, but it doesn't matter. It's large bore either way. So I've been working on Bordoni A2 number 6, so I figured I'd record like the first couple lines from that just on all three horns. Just a warning, this isn't like a super fair comparison because I pretty much only practiced this etude on my large bore. It's especially weird on the small bore because I'm not used to playing this etude without a trigger. Like I can play it on the small bore, but it's just weird. So anyway, so I'll just play clips now of the same thing on all three horns. So this is the small bore tenor trombone. I know some people might get mad if I call this like the jazz trombone because it's technically not just a jazz trombone. I've seen people use these for not jazz band, but pretty much that's all I use it for is jazz band. Um, and it works pretty well for that. This horn, this is a Reynolds 28. And then, but in my opinion, for like top two parts in a big band, you gotta have a small bore. Um, and yeah, it has kind of like that like brighter sound just because it's smaller. The bore is so small. Mine is kind of strange, or not strange, but different than most small bores. I don't know if you can see, but the bell is different. So the bell on this horn is actually the same size as my large bore here. That's not usually the case. Usually small bore trombones have smaller bells as well. I'm not quite sure why this is like that, but I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. I like it. So all three of my trombones, I believe, actually have the same size bell. I think they're all 8.5 inches. Um, so I don't know. That's just kind of a random thing. But the horn is smaller. It's just 0.500 is the bore size, and then obviously no trigger. There are some small bore trombones that have triggers, like King 3B for example. It's not as small as this. It's like 0.508. That has a trigger. I've seen like modified like Shire's horns with triggers, but usually the small bores are straight because you just don't need a trigger really for this small bore. So there's just really no point. Okay, so this is a medium bore tenor trombone. This is a Conn 50H. Um, and medium bore tenor trombones are just kind of odd because they're kind of like too big to use for like first or second in a big band, but then they're still not quite big enough to use in like the way that you would use the large tenor. So they're just kind of, some people like them because it's kind of more like a jack of all trades instrument. So like you can use it for jazz bands and you can also use it the same horn for like wind ensemble, but so it does both jobs, but it kind of does them both poorly. So I think it's better to just have two horns, that one horn for jazz band that's good for that, and one horn for like band, normal band, or orchestra or whatever that's good for that. So just two instruments, because this you could, I guess, just use this for everything, but it would kind of just be bad at everything. So yeah. I'm not a huge fan of medium bore tenor trombones. I could make a whole rant video about these, but I'm not going to do that right now. But I don't really like these very much. I do have one, but I don't really use it very much at all. So I'm using a Schilke 51D on this because for a while I didn't have a large tenor, so I was basically trying to pretend this was a large tenor, use it like a large tenor. So I use a 51D on it because it's the only mouthpiece I had that was small shank, that was like the size that you would use for like a large tenor. And then I use it now because it's pretty much the same rim size as my Greg Black. I think it might be a little bigger. If you're actually like getting a mouthpiece specifically to use for this sort of thing, probably not a 51D, maybe like a normal 51 or a 51B or something. But this is all I had, so that's why I use it. Alright, so that was my large bore, again, the King 4B. And that's what I use probably for pretty much most things. Pretty much everything except for jazz band I use this instrument for. Um, and so I'll just kind of talk about large bores in general now. So it has a large bore. It's 0.546547. So it's pretty big for a tenor trombone. This is generally used in like wind ensembles or symphonic bands, and then orchestras, of course. They use the tenor trombone players use large bore tenor trombones. So as you can see, this obviously has a trigger. There are large bore tenors that are straight, but in my opinion, that's pretty much useless. That might be a hot take or something. I don't know, but I think large tenor without a valve. This is the valve. If you didn't know, is pretty much useless. So this has a trigger F attachment. Just means it can play lower. And then also it has a bigger bell than most small bores. And then you use kind of a bigger mouthpiece on it. This is a Greg Black 5G, and then I sometimes use a 4G size mouthpiece. So everything about this is just kind of bigger than like most student trombones. And that's good because it kind of has a fuller, richer sound, and it has more weight, I guess you could say. Definitely does a job very well for like playing in orchestras and stuff. So yeah, that's the large. Okay, so next thing I'm going to talk about is kind of the different mouthpieces for the different sizes of trombone. So there's no like exact size that anyone necessarily needs to use for like any instrument, but there are definitely some like generalizations. Like don't like play on a bass trombone mouthpiece for like lead trombone in a big band. Like just don't do that. So for small bore, generally you want a smaller mouthpiece. Again, there's like a range of within that, but generally something on the smaller size. Like usually like 6.5 AL and smaller or the equivalent. I use for most of my stuff on small bore, I use Bach 9. Again, I only use a small bore for like jazz. So usually I use the Bach 9. Sometimes when I play like lead trombone excerpts or whatever, I use a Bach 12C, but I don't do that very often. And then medium bore, it kind of depends on what you use medium bore for. If you use like just one medium bore and that's your horn for like both, you're using that essentially as both the small tenor and the large tenor, like you're using that for jazz and concert stuff, then you should probably have two mouthpieces at least. So kind of like a smaller mouthpiece for jazz and maybe a bigger mouthpiece for the other stuff. I've used a 6.5 AL on my medium bore, and it sounds actually surprisingly to me sounded a lot like a small bore. So that's an option, I guess. Use a smaller mouthpiece like that on the medium bore, and then a larger mouthpiece for concert stuff. So when I play medium bore, I use a Schilke 51D. Again, I don't ever actually like play medium bore. I should say when I practice medium bore, because I don't use it like besides when I practice it, and I don't practice it very much. But when I do practice it, I use a 51D because I only ever practice like lighter concert stuff on it, I guess, because I just don't need it really. So I use a Schilke 51D on it because it's the only mouthpiece I have that's small shank, but is still kind of like in that bigger, like large tenor size for what you would use for mouthpieces. I think a 51D is pretty much like a 5 size mouthpiece, and it feels very similar in size to the Greg Black that I use on large tenor. I think that the Schilke is actually a little wider at the rim, but that's not important. Um, I would say if you are in a situation where you're like using a medium bore for like an orchestra or whatever, um, probably don't use a 51D like I do. If you like that size, I would recommend either just a normal 51 or a 51B, because the D cup is meant for euphonium, not trombone, and it does not work very well, but I don't have a normal 51, so I just use this. And then for large tenor, you know, obviously want to use a larger mouthpiece. Kind of just corresponds to, you know, like larger instrument, larger mouthpiece. Um, and I use mostly a Greg Black 5G. That's what I used on the recordings you just heard. Sometimes I use a King 29, which is kind of more like a 4 size. The kind of large tenor range is like 3G to 5G. And of course, you know, the different, whatever the equivalent is of that in whatever company. But that's kind of generally the range for large tenor. Um, the bigger mouthpieces just correspond to, you know, the more like powerful, fuller sounding instrument, and richer low register and stuff. So yeah. So in summary, that's kind of the differences between the large, medium, and small bore tenor trombones. Kind of what they sound like. It's kind of an unfair recording example for the Bordoni, because I that's not something I would like actually use like this small bore for. Um, but you know, and then kind of the differences between them, what the like pros and cons for different things, and then like generally what mouthpieces to use for what. So I do actually use all three of these at least sometimes. I use a large bore for like band, wind ensemble, and then I use the small bore for jazz band. And the medium bore I don't really use that much. I pretty much only use it like when it's like a concert setting, but it's so I want to trigger, but it's like outside, and I don't want to like damage a large bore, so I just use a medium bore because I don't really care about it that much. Um, I do practice it sometimes though. Um, so yeah, they're different. They're all different, but they're very similar. They're all tenor trombones, but they are different in ways that matter. Mostly the sound. Um, Obviously the trigger as well, but mostly the sound. Um, I would say for most high school and college tenor trombonists, it's pretty nice to have a small bore and a large bore, so two trombones. If you have both of those, you don't need a medium bore trombone. I have one, but I don't need it. Like I never use it. Like I use it sometimes, but I wouldn't have to. Like if I didn't have it, it would be okay to use a different instrument for it. I just use it just kind of just because I have it, but you don't need it. So, um, what I would recommend is having two instruments, large bore trombone and small bore trombone, and I think that works pretty well. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something helpful from this video.